back in my days, and well, first of all, I was born in India. My parents were missionaries, so obviously born into a very Christian family. Went to a very Christian college, and then went to medical school. And really, during medical school, my faith became a lot less important to me because it was all about passing the test. And during those days, we took the Hippocratic Oath, which said we will never harm anybody, including abortion and taking the life, so no euthanasia, no abortions. But then in coming to Wesley for my residency back in 72, that was Roe v. Wade had just happened. So one of my first mentors was an OB-GYN who called me one day and says, we have a little teenage girl from Oklahoma who needs some help. And her father's a doctor, and turned out that I had spent some time with that doctor in a mentoring relationship during medical school. But his 16-year-old daughter was pregnant, and she'd come up to Wichita to get an abortion. So she was about 6 or 8 weeks pregnant. So at that time, we were just doing first trimester abortions. So I participated in several in my training and didn't think anything of it. But then one time I was up in Belleville, Kansas, and the doctor up there was a family doctor, and he also did abortions. So he had, again, a young teenage gal came in for an abortion. He did it. I didn't participate in that one. But then he left town that weekend and left me kind of in charge of making rounds. Well, this girl was now having a lot more pain than she should have had, was running a fever. So I was worried that maybe he had perforated the uterus. I took an x-ray, and to my astonishment, there was a much larger baby in there that he had not examined her properly. So I called him, and he came back, and he was very angry at her for misleading him with dates, so he blamed her. But I watched as he pulled out a perfectly normal-looking 24-week baby boy. And my son, Tim, at that time was 2 months old. And it was like all of a sudden, the scales fell from my eyes, and I saw what we were really doing. And I said, this is never going to be part of my practice again. But I didn't go around scolding other residents who were doing it. That was their choice. So then when the Summer of Mercy happened, then it was all about protests. And one day Jeff said, well, let's go down and pray in front of Tiller's clinic. And so I said, that's fine. So we just kind of stood around and prayed for the families. And then Jeff went up to the gate, which was illegal. And so knowing he'd be arrested, so I stood with him. So both of us were arrested and taken downtown and booked in jail. And turned out that the cop who arrested us was a patient of mine who was pro-life. And so then the whole thing became this, you're either pro-life or pro-death or pro-choice, whatever. And all of a sudden Wichita became a flashpoint for the whole country. And we had CNN and all these reporters coming, and they were eating it up because this was all about women's rights and pro-life. So, and there were plans to have a large meeting at Cessna Stadium where they invited some national speakers to come, and the goal back then, as I understood, was to raise enough money to find lawyers to where we could somehow make abortion illegal, at least in Wichita or preferably Kansas. So that was the whole point. But I had started a small group of people together, and we were just saying, what can we do to help the families who are in crisis rather than just protest? Because I got tired of the protests. I felt like Christ never protested what sinners were doing. He protested what the church was doing or not doing. That's what he protested. But he loved to meet with sinners. He loved to dine and drink with sinners. And he never protested. And so I thought, if we want to do this in a Christ-like way, then we need to move more to compassion So initially we called it the Compassionate Network. So someone heard that I'd started this little organization. It was hardly an organization. It was an idea that we were going to try and find some way to give free counseling to women and families who are in crisis, that's all. And to give them the options that we would, as a community, would come beside them and help them through their crisis. To at least give them other choices. So they invited me to speak at this turnout. They had about 30,000 people there. Pat Robertson and a bunch of other speakers were there. So my whole point was, can we move beyond protests and provide services for these families in crisis? And at the end of that, they gave me a check for $25,000 and said, see what you can do. So that's how it got started. And then we changed the name to HopeNet. And very soon, within the first few months, we found that pregnancy was not the problem, really. It was, there were issues behind the pregnancy that had not been addressed. A lot of abuse, drug use, dysfunctional families, that a lot of these crisis pregnancies were not because the girl just recklessly got pregnant, but there were some real issues. So the solution for a lot of them was abortion, and I knew Dr. Tiller personally, and I wrote him a letter saying that we had a new organization in town, that we wanted to give them alternative choices if he wanted to send them, that we felt that they just need to know what all their options were, not just abortion. So when I wrote the letter, I shared it with a couple other doctors, and they said, well, I'd like to sign that too. So then we took out a full-page ad in the paper, and we had something like 200 doctors or so sign it, which was a huge thing. But it was never against, we want to stop abortion. It was more about, we want to help those who are caught in a family crisis where there's a pregnancy. So it very quickly turned into more of a counseling agency where we were addressing much darker issues than pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So it didn't take us long to move beyond crisis pregnancy to really dealing with trauma, abuse, neglect, abandonment, a lot of family issues. And so I think, again, when you look at what Christ said about the kingdom of heaven on earth, it's all about taking care of the least of these. It's about visiting those who had committed crimes and were in prison. It's about those who had gone into poverty for some reason. We might call them lazy, we might call them whatever, but he said, if you're not taking care of the basic needs of the least of these, if you're not willing to talk to the Samaritan woman who is rejected by your faith and your people, if you're not willing to stoop down and wash each other's feet, then you don't understand what the kingdom of heaven is like. And I brought the kingdom of heaven here. It's not somewhere later, next year or in the next life. No, the kingdom of heaven is with us now. And here's how you do it. So the whole Sermon on the Mount is all about how do we practice the way of Christ on earth with the people who are hurting. So that's if you call it the big idea, it's not a new idea. It's the idea that Christ gave us. And I feel like the church has, in large part, neglected that. So a lot of parachurch organizations have taken up the challenge of taking up the needs of the poor. When I was in Nairobi and visited the Mission of Hope, one lady went and saw these 500,000 people living in slums. She said, I've got to do something. She started a preschool. 20 years later, it's all the way through high school. She has a medical clinic, a dental clinic, and it receives millions of dollars of support from all over the world just because one person said, I need to do something. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I did much more than just, I played the part of a spark plug, but it takes a lot of pistons and a lot of machinery and fuel for this thing to work. And I thank God for all the people that came into HopeNet, like you, and all the counselors that are willing to sit here and deal with the trauma that so many people are going through. but it does take the Christ in us to do it. I don't think humanly we do as good a job. But when we have hope through Christ for ourselves and we feel fully forgiven, we feel fully loved, we feel treasured, then we can learn to treasure those who are wounded and hurt.
So tell me about the name. How did you come up with HopeNet?
Now, like I said, we started with the Compassionate Network, but a friend of mine, Ray Dorsett, who ran a video industry here in town called Harvest Ministries, and he said, that sounds a little soft and wishy. How about HopeNet, where you not only do counseling here, but you network with others in town who are doing similar things. And so the word hope is huge. Faith, hope, and love, these three. Love is the greatest, but even above faith, hope comes second, which is interesting. Faith, hope, and love, these three, the greatest is love. But so giving someone hope is just basically saying, no matter what you're going through, I'm with you, which is right out of Psalm 23. Though I walk through the valleys, the dark valleys, the shadow of death, I'm with you. So just having the presence of someone else who really cares is huge for me too. And I've been through some dark valleys in the last 10 years. And it's meant a lot to me to have people around me to say, we don't condemn you, judge you, we're with you, and we love you. So, so the word HopeNet, part of it is also a net catches things that might fall through. So I love that. There's a lot of stories of fishing in the Bible and catching people with a net. But the networking is important too, because we can't do it all. We just can't, and we shouldn't. So reaching out to other organizations who are trying to minister to people in need, that's an important part of what we do. I'm glad that we don't push religion on people here, that we don't instantly say, well, God's going to fix everything. Because most people come in with no faith in God, or they feel that God has abandoned them, or they've been harmed by the church, they feel harmed by God, or forgotten by God, abandoned by the church. I've known several women who were violated by their own pastor or youth ministers. That happens far too often. So to immediately start out by saying, well, let's just pray about this and Jesus will fix everything, I don't think is what we do and never have. So meeting people where they are, where they're broken, and saying, I'm with you in this, and I will do everything possible to help you find solutions for this.
In 1991, did you think you would be sitting here 35 years later?
Didn't have a clue what I was doing. We didn't have I know, I never dreamed that this would be what it is today. And I think it'd be much more.